Hello fellow wand lovers, and welcome back to the channel. It's been a while since I made a PSOpinion video, and ironically enough, this one is a follow-up to the last one. Today I'd like to talk about Techters' technique problem, or rather how rough we have it as Techters these days. If you've been paying attention to recent news and gameplay quirks, you might have noticed that we Techters are really not in a great spot right now. I mean, we weren't to begin with, but man, it's gotten worse. TechArts customizations don't even try to fix our issues with techniques. Encore Jump was nerfed, which was a decent chunk of our DPS. Falz Dalion, the currently hardest boss in the game, doesn't have a single down phase until the very end of the fight. Meaning that a decent amount of our shift to potency goes unused for almost the entire fight. Originally, I wanted to make this video as a sort of halfway checkpoint talking about how the TechArts customization system has been treating us. But then Falz Dalion came out, and just piled on top of the issues for no reason. So, let's start with techniques. It's something I briefly talked about in the last video, but honestly, seeing how TechArts has been treating Force so far, I changed my mind. The idea I proposed in my previous video was dumb. Instead of giving us skills to incentivize raw technique casting, the devs should just fix the techniques themselves, because that's essentially what they're doing on Force. Lightning and wind techniques already work flawlessly on Techter. In my second TechArts video, I briefly explained how Gizonde by itself is enough for a fully working Techter combo. Because Gizonde hits exactly 10 times, we can set it and continue our wand gameplay, then revoke the element, and use the accumulated Zonde clad to reapply our wand element at a DPS positive. This right there is the key to fixing Techter's DPS, or at least some of it. Now let's look at Zonde Gale. This one works on Techter purely because it's a one-tech combo. You use uncharged Gizon to apply the Gale marking on the enemy, then immediately revoke your element. This cuts the cast animation of Gizon short. Afterwards you use charged Gizon to immediately reapply the wind element. While this combo isn't incredibly powerful, it's still DPS positive. Which is more than I can say about the other elements, because they are all DPS negative on Techter. For example, on fire techniques, the strongest one we can use to reapply the element would be Jifoy. It would be DPS neutral on paper, but it has not only accuracy issues, but also charge time issues. It's the only technique with a charge time longer than others, and it throws me off every time I try using it. Would be cool if we could craft it to eliminate any of these issues, but for some reason Foy had to get a customization first. Worse yet, uncharged Jifoy is kinda useless on Techter since the guard frames do much less damage than on Force, and the AoE damage isn't good compared to wand alternatives. Not to mention Foybrand goes completely unused on Techter. On ice, the best way to reapply the element is through Jabarda, but that is at a heavy DPS loss without any ice sigil to use. Similarly to Jifoy, uncharged Jabarda is kinda useless right now. Dark element techniques are in a similar boat. The best way to reapply the element is through charged Gimagid, which is also at a DPS negative. Charged Megid Type 2 is slightly stronger, but has severe accuracy issues. Similarly to the other two G-techs I mentioned, uncharged Gimagid is kinda useless right now, especially since Type 1 Megid is a good replacement on Force. If you're starting to see patterns, good. That means you're paying attention. Now, light. It is by far the most important element to nail, since it seems that's the element Falzes will be always weak to. And yet it sucks. On Force it was kind of fixed with the guard frames customization, but for Techter it's still unusable. Normally Grants would be the better tech to reapply the element with, but that one has accuracy problems, and the customization that fixes it also increases charge time, so it's not optimal for us. Similarly to Jifoy, the guard frames on Grants don't do much for us. So because of these issues, Gigrants ends up being the better technique to reapply element with. And you guessed it, it's a terrible DPS loss, and uncharged Gigrants does similarly very little to be worth casting at all. Alright, let me spell out the pattern in case you haven't picked up on it yet. All of the techniques that work best on Techter are from the G line, and all of them that are a DPS loss also coincidentally have an uncharged version that isn't worth using. Which sucks because all customizations so far have been avoiding those techniques. Why did we need the Foy customization first? Why couldn't we skip fire and cover both light techniques first, just to cover the most important element right away? Maybe uncharged Gigrants would have been a damage over time effect that would slowly build up Grants glitter, so that when it comes time to reapply the element, we can use a glitter boosted Gigrants. Just having glitter available for those situations alone would be a 10% damage increase, but what if the damage over time is as strong as uncharged Gizonde? It may make the combo DPS positive. Apply the same school of thought to the other elements, and suddenly things start making sense. Fixing our technique rotations by itself would be a massive boost to our DPS, but there are other ways in which Techter needs help. For example, we don't have anything that deals good damage during a down. This might be where a wave crash customization comes into play. Right now, Swift Smash Type 2 does everything Wave Crash did but better, so this PA needs a new purpose in life. But these are all the issues that can be fixed with TechArts customizations. A lot of them can't, and I did mention them in my previous video. This is probably where the Techter expansion will come into play. Things like improving wand lovers, improving the wand weapon action, or giving Swift Smash a second charge stage. These would go a long way in making Techter a better class to play. But while I can imagine all of these issues getting fixed at some point, Shifted Deban is one of these things the devs will likely remain stubborn about, and it's extremely unfortunate because it needs improvements desperately. Dark Falz Dalion has the least amount of downs. The downs you see during Phase 1 are fake. They don't activate our shifted down potency. Dalion can only be broken during cannon phase, and the only real down that you can improve as a Techter comes from the final phase, which is usually the last minute or two before the fight ends. This is bad. Honestly, at this point I'd prefer if they remove this skill and move the potency to the unconditional part, because it barely does anything in fights where it would matter. And the worst part is that Ranger doesn't have to deal with any of it. They have a stronger buff that doesn't rely on enemy design to work. I don't know why Techter can't have a stronger Shifta when Ranger is allowed to roam free like that. It's incredibly frustrating. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video/rant, or whatever it was. My grievances come from a place of love, and it's really frustrating having to feel like dead weight. The Techter player base, or at least the vocal part of it, is not very happy right now, and I hope this is one of those issues where SEGA just expects us to cope for a while, and has fixes planned for later. Which is kinda silly, and I wish they would at least try to communicate that to us, but oh well. Regardless of what happens, I'll still be your trusty Techter succubus making videos and guides on the class. As always, a big shout out to the Merchants Guild, generously funding and bankrolling these videos. I love all of you. I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care!